There are too many Israelis saying, kill them all, right? There's that whole kill them all mentality that we see. And that mentality has been growing by leaps and bounds, and they want to kill all the Palestinians. So I think eventually this whole situation is going to culminate into genocide. And I'm not talking about genocide in the sense of what we saw in Gaza. I'm not talking about what happened in Gaza. I mean a genocide where people are targeted for the purpose of extermination. I'm not talking about what happened in Gaza, where Israel would hit a building and then say, oops, sorry, we killed civilians. We were aiming at a terrorist. Those civilians were collateral damage. They died. It's a shame. It's a tragedy. That wasn't our intention. But this is what happens when you have terrorists living amongst you, right? That's been the argument. That's been the narrative of the Israeli government. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an actual policy where Israel will comb through the streets of the West Bank, of Gaza, or in some other area, and just kill everybody, or try to kill everybody. That's what I'm talking. I think eventually that's what's going to happen. And it could happen in just the West Bank. It could happen in the West Bank and Gaza. It could happen in some other place. But I can't predict the future entirely. But I can have I think we can have a rough estimate based on history as to what's going to happen. And based on history, based on looking at the history of genocide, when you have a powerful country dealing with an occupied people, and those occupied people don't want to give up and they don't want to give in, and they do terrorist attacks or they do guerrilla tactics, what happens is that the occupying power many times will do a genocide. We saw this done by Germany when it was occupying Namibia. We saw this done by the Germans when they were occupying Eastern Europe. We saw this done by the Ottoman Empire when it was occupying the Armenian people. We've just seen this scenario play out too many damn times to say that we don't know what's going to happen. It's obvious what's going to happen. Blood will be shed. In what order that's going to happen, in what sort of arrangement that's going to happen, that's for the future to tell. But as Mr. Benny Morris said, it is possible that Israel will even create death camps, like what they did in Auschwitz, what they did in Poland, what they did in Germany. So this whole thing about deporting people, right? Trump said that the people in Gaza should be deported. There should be mass deportations. They shouldn't be allowed to come back, etc., etc. Well, this really stroked the egos of all the Israeli nationalists. Oh, yes, look, America is on our side. America says that we should have the deportations. Yes, America. I'm Israel Chai. They should do mass deportations. You see, so like I said in the past, the demon is out of the lamp. The jinn, the al-jinn, all right, is out of the lamp. Aladdin has grabbed that lamp and rubbed that shit. And the jinn is out. The genie is out. And so what's happening now? What's happening is the normalization of the idea of ethnic cleansing. That's what's happening. It's being normalized through language, through words. And this is how things get normalized, by the way. The normalization of something always gets done through rhetoric. And initially, that's how it gets done, right? It always gets done at the beginning through rhetoric. That's how the normalization process begins. So we start talking about deportations, et cetera, et cetera. But here is the thing. While there is talk about doing mass deportations, and you are seeing people by the tens of thousands being kicked out of their homes in the West Bank, what is not being talked about as much is the fact that there is this growing rhetoric in Israel that demands for mass extermination of Palestinians. They don't talk about this, but this is the truth. There is a growing demand for a Holocaust of the Palestinians. And we're going to talk about that. There was an article that was published recently by an Israeli newspaper. Genocides are done under the guise of deportations. The Armenians were told, and I learned this recently, but before the bloodshed of the Armenian genocide broke out, the Ottoman government said, we're just going to deport you. No killing. We're just going to deport you. And they reported this in the newspapers. The Ottoman government had it reported in the newspapers, in the media, that the Armenians were going to be simply deported. And they were deported under a decree. Do you know what that decree was called? Do you know what words were used to describe that decree? Temporary law of deportation. Temporary. Oh, it's temporary. And it's just deportation, not killing. But it was a genocide. And it was a policy of genocide that was done under the guise of deportation and done under the pretext of war, because the Ottoman Empire was in a war against the Russians and against the British at the time. So the Israeli government is talking about what? Deportations. It's just deportations. But then you have all this rhetoric that's happening in Israel's political discourse in which genocide is being entertained and pushed. It says here, normalization of calls for the extermination of Palestinians may be related to the outrage aroused by Hamas ceremonies during the release of hostages and the transfer of bodies, but it may also be evidence of the Israeli understanding that the Palestinians are not going anywhere, and that to make them disappear, they simply need to be killed. So they want to do mass deportations, but the Palestinians are saying, we're not going anywhere. In fact, Palestinians who have been driven out of their homes in the West Bank, some of them have actually come back, even though they're living in an area that's, for the most part, deserted and devastated, and the roads have been destroyed. They actually just go back to their homes. They say, no, we're not leaving anywhere. We're going to stay here. They're very stubborn people. Pals are very, very stubborn people, amongst the most stubborn people in the world. And so you have these Israelis saying, okay, well, they're not leaving, so let's just kill them. That is the thing that they're resorting to, right? That's the policy that they want to resort to. So it says here, at the end of October 2023, we published here in Local Conversation the full text of the plan formulated by Gila Gamaliel, then the Minister of Intelligence, for the evacuation of the civilian population from Gaza to Sinai. The plan received extensive coverage around the world as it was seen as proof that Israel's real goal in its war in Gaza, which was then still in the aerial bombing phase before the ground invasion, was not to eliminate Hamas, but to expel the Palestinians from the Strip. In Israel, however, the coverage was limited. And why were they covering? Why were they limiting the coverage on this policy that Israel wants to push, this policy of mass deportation? Because they don't want the Israeli citizens to know so much about it? Why is that, I wonder? It's obvious ethnic cleansing. Apparently you have something to hide. What do you have to hide, O Israel? Why do you prevent your people, or why do you try to prevent your people from knowing about this policy of mass deportation? But when Trump came out and said, I want to do mass deportations, the whole Israeli right said, oh yes, this is great. So what Trump did by saying that, even if Trump doesn't mean it, and maybe he does mean it, we have yet to see. Time will tell. Time will tell. The future will be a teacher for us, because we always learn things as time goes on. But time will tell. But when Trump said that, he gave the green light. He said, yeah, deportation is great. So one day, some Israeli fanatics are going to say, this is the time. And if the Palestinians don't want to leave, guess what's going to happen? Genocide, killing, bloodshed, the whole thing. In Israel, however, coverage was limited, perhaps because the Ministry of Intelligence had no authority. It has since been closed, perhaps because Gamaliel had no real political weight, and perhaps because the Israeli media prefers not to deal with the war crimes that Israel is planning. Ooh, I see. So Israel doesn't want to talk about its own war crimes so much. But thankfully, there are Israeli publications that do talk about Israeli war crimes. There's Plus 972, there's Haaretz. I think Ynet will talk about this. There is The Hottest Place in Hell, and yes, that is the name of the publication, although it is called, the title of that publication is The Hottest Place in Hell, but the Hebrew translation of that term, I don't know how you say it in Hebrew, but you do have Israeli publications that do talk about Israeli war crimes, and they are trying to shed light on this darkness. They are trying to show the world, tell the world about this stuff. So it says here that 16 months later, Gamaliel's plan has effectively become the official plan of the Israeli government. The credit must first and foremost, of course, go to President Donald Trump, but it cannot be denied that this is a maturation of ideas that have long been cherished by the Israeli public. The fact is that even after Trump and his people began to dilute his transfer plan in recent days, saying that it was just a recommendation and that it was not a forced evacuation. Benjamin Netanyahu continues to speak in praise of, quote, President Trump's groundbreaking plan to allow freedom of exit for Gazans. And Defense Minister Israel Katz is establishing an administration for voluntary exit from Gaza. These formulations are present almost one-to-one in Gamaliel's plan. So it says here that therefore it is not worth casually dismissing the words of Knesset Deputy Speaker Nassim Vaturi, according to which, quote, the children and women should be separated and the adults in Gaza should be killed. So you have actual mass murder being promoted and pushed for in the Israeli Knesset. So Mr. Vaturi is calling for mass murder, and this guy is the Knesset. He is the deputy speaker for the Israeli parliament, and he's calling for mass murder. Mass murder. So yes, there are these calls for deportations, but there's also calls for murder and genocide, mass murder, massacres. So the writing is on the wall. The writing is on the wall. Eventually, there's going to be a genocide of the Palestinians. And no, well, there's already been a genocide in Gaza. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an actual policy where people are directly targeted for extermination with the intention of exterminating all Palestinians. It's going to be the final solution. That's what it's going to be. Vaturi may be a more marginal politician than Gamaliel, but he marks a development in the Jewish-Israeli discourse. No more threats of a second Nakba, which took over the right-wing discourse even before October the 7th and entered the mainstream after it. Not just a general's plan of siege and starvation, which was actually implemented by expelling the residents of the northern Gaza Strip and demolishing their homes, and was only stopped because of the ceasefire, but rather a blueprint for annihilation, for a final solution. That's what I'm talking about. A final solution to the problem of Gaza and the Palestinians in general. And that's what happens when you have a situation where there's an occupier and there's an occupied people that don't want to give up. There's an occupied people that don't want to submit. And they do guerrilla tactics or they do terrorism. And this goes on for so long that eventually what happens is radicals will take over the government of the occupier and will say, this is what we have to do. Extermination. Like I've said, we saw this with Germany's occupation of Poland. We saw this with Germany and the Jews. We saw this with Germany and the Russians. We saw this with Germany and a lot of Germany's here. Germany and Namibia. We saw this with the Ottomans and the Armenians. It's a continuation. And it culminates into what? Mass murder, bloodshed, all of that horror. All of it. Vaturi's words are noteworthy because they come against the backdrop of a normalization of the discourse of annihilation. If Minister Amichai Eliyahu was forced to squirm after saying at the beginning of the war that dropping a nuclear bomb on Gaza was one way to deal with Hamas there, now such statements are being made openly without any attempt to hide or whitewash, and it's right in the open. That's the whole point. Before, they had to hide it. They had to conceal it under certain terminology, conceal it under certain policy. Well, we're not interested in killing civilians. We just want to kill terrorists, etc., etc. But eventually, things are going to escalate to the point where it's going to be an explicit calling for the extermination of an entire people. And so it says here, the examples are many and varied. So here are all these examples of Israeli officials or prominent people in Israel calling for a genocide. And it says here, Attorney Kinneret Brashi, a prominent influential on the right who always bothers to mention that she voted for Meretz in the past, tweeted that, quote, every trace of the murderous mutations in Gaza should be erased from the delivery rooms, so we're talking about newborn babies, to the last elderly person in Gaza, 100% destined to die in Gaza. So that's this woman. She's saying mass murder, mass extermination. That's exactly what I want. That's exactly what I'm looking for, etc., etc. The actor Yiftach Klein, who describes himself as being from the Oslo generation, said in a PR interview with Walla on the occasion of his participation in a new play at the Habima Theater that, quote, "I don't believe them, the Palestinians. I don't believe in them, and I don't want to see them alive again. Ever. Let them be sent behind the mountains of darkness. Let them die there." Singer Ofer Levy said in an interview on Avi Shoshan's podcast on the Ma'arev website that if he were a soldier in the army, there would be no more prisoners. I would kill them all and also burn them, bring gasoline, give the order to pour it out and light it. Burn everything down to the last one, including everyone. So burn everyone, kill everyone. This is like what the Turks did in Smyrna when the Turks had a war and the Greeks tried to take territory from the Ottomans, and the Ottomans said nope, and the Ottomans defeated the Greeks, and the Ottomans said, okay, well, all the Greeks in Smyrna, you guys are having a bunch of soldiers in your midst, so we're gonna now exterminate the city, kill all the fighting age males. I'll give a chance for the women and children to escape. This is pretty much what Kemal Ataturk said. That he said, well, I'll give some opportunity for people to escape. And he did that with Asa Jennings, the American humanitarian. He told Asa Jennings that you have 7 days to provide the ships for the elderly and the women and the children. But as for the fighting age males, they're all going to die. And if you, Mr. American humanitarian, Asa Jennings, cannot get the elderly and the women and the children out, then they're also going to die. Ataturk didn't give a damn about civilian life. He didn't. He gave a chance for humanitarians to help the civilians, but he just gave them 7 days. And if they weren't able to save civilian life, Ataturk would have had those people killed. Ataturk's soldiers would have killed those people without hesitation. So this is what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a spirit of genocide. It's a genocidal, mass murdering spirit. Ortho Christos says, wow, and these psychopathic crazies have a mainstream platform. Yes, that's the whole point. They're not just people on forums or on blogs, but these are people who are prominent in the government. So what is the writing on the wall? The writing on the wall says that genocide is coming. That's the bottom line. Oh, by the way, since Israel occupied a nice chunk of Syria, would that be possible for Israelis to dump Palestinians in there? That is a good observation, and I have thought about this. Yes, it is possible that Israel will just dump Palestinians in Syria. That is also possible. Either way, Israel is going to be screwed over, because let's say Israel does mass deportations of Palestinians and they dump a whole bunch of people in Syria. Do you think all Palestinians are going to want to go to Syria? Nope. People are going to fight back. People will resist. And blood will be shed. There will be blood. So either way, people are going to be murdered. There's going to be mass killings. And there's going to be mass deportations. And if those deportations are done in a way where people are just thrown into Syria, then the Turks, no matter what, actually, the Turks are going to say, look, Israel is driving people out of their homes. Israel is murdering innocent Palestinians. We must be the hero for the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian people, and now we must punish Israel. And thus will begin the next Holocaust of the Jewish people. And I think that's how the next Holocaust is going to happen, by the way.